My wife slept with her boss. If that's the only part of this story you remember, you'll miss the reason my marriage actually ended. Cheating wasn't what finally broke me. It was the fact that months later, after every lie had been exposed and both of us were sitting in a conference room with our attorneys, Rachel looked at me with a completely calm face and said, "I'm sorry, I missed our anniversary." Then she went quiet. She never apologized for the affair. She never apologized for betraying 13 years of marriage. In her mind, forgetting one dinner deserved an apology. Choosing another man didn't. I walked into that room expecting excuses, tears, maybe even regret. Instead, I met a stranger wearing my wife's face. If you're wondering how someone can destroy two families and still believe they did nothing unforgivable, this story is exactly that. My name is Daniel. I'm 39 years old, and until last year I would have told anyone I had a good marriage. Rachel and I had been together since college, built our careers from nothing, bought our first home together, and slowly created the kind of life most couples spend years chasing. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable. We had traditions that never changed. Every Sunday morning we ate breakfast at the same neighborhood diner. Every December we drove to Wisconsin to spend Christmas with her parents. Every anniversary we promised ourselves we'd never let work become more important than us. That's why I didn't panic when Rachel started working longer hours after being promoted to senior management at a Chicago software company. Success always comes with sacrifices, or at least that's what I believed. Her department director, Michael, came up in conversations almost every day. Sometimes he sounded demanding, sometimes brilliant, and sometimes impossible to please. I never felt threatened by him because I trusted my wife completely. Looking back, trust wasn't my biggest strength. It was my biggest blind spot. A week before our anniversary, Rachel seemed happier than she'd been in months. She told me a major promotion might finally be within reach if one last project went well. I remember hugging her in our kitchen and telling her how proud I was. She smiled, kissed me, and said none of it would have been possible without my support. I believed every word. To celebrate both our anniversary and what I thought would soon be another promotion, I secretly booked a table at the restaurant where I'd proposed to her 13 years earlier. I even took the entire afternoon off work so I could surprise her. The morning of our anniversary felt perfect. She left the house wearing a navy blue dress she'd bought just a few days earlier. Before closing the front door, she smiled and said, "Don't worry, nothing at work is stealing tonight from us." Those were the last honest words she spoke to me for a very long time. That evening, I waited. First with excitement, then with concern, and finally with silence. 6 o'clock passed, then 7. At 7:18 she texted me saying an emergency executive meeting had started. At 8:11 she apologized for running late and promised she'd explain everything when she got home. After that, every call went straight to voicemail. By the time the restaurant canceled our reservation, the candles on our dining table had already burned down to melted wax. Around midnight, Rachel finally walked through our front door looking exhausted, hugged me for barely a second, whispered, "I'm so sorry I missed our anniversary," and went upstairs before I could ask a single question. I stood there staring at the cold dinner we'd never eat, convincing myself that work had simply gotten in the way. What I didn't know was that my wife hadn't spent that evening trapped in a meeting. She'd spent it making a choice that would eventually expose a secret powerful enough to destroy her career, her boss's marriage, my own marriage, and an entire department inside one of Chicago's fastest growing companies. The next morning, Rachel acted exactly the way she always did after a stressful day at work. She made coffee, apologized once more for ruining our anniversary, and promised we'd celebrate the following weekend. I wanted to believe her, because trusting her was easier than questioning 13 years of marriage over one bad night. For the next few weeks, life looked completely normal. We laughed over dinner, watched our favorite shows, and even started planning a short trip for the fall. If there were cracks in our marriage, I couldn't see them. Looking back, I think that's the hardest part about betrayal. It almost never begins with obvious lies. It begins with ordinary days that make you believe everything is still fine. Rachel's promotion finally came through about a month later. The company announced she would become one of the youngest directors in her division. I was genuinely proud of her. We invited friends over to celebrate, and everyone kept congratulating her on the promotion she had worked so hard to earn. That night, while everyone was laughing in our backyard, I noticed something strange. Michael, her boss, stopped by for less than 15 minutes to personally congratulate her. He was married, probably in his late 40s, confident, and the kind of executive who could make an entire room pay attention without raising his voice. When he shook my hand, he smiled just a little too long before saying, "You have an incredible wife, Daniel. She's earned every bit of this." At the time, I took it as a compliment. Today, I hear those words very differently. About 2 weeks later, Rachel called me during lunch, sounding nervous. She asked if I'd seen a large white envelope from her office because she thought she might have accidentally brought it home. I checked the house but couldn't find anything. She sounded relieved and told me not to worry because it was probably still on her desk. We never talked about it again. 3 days later, while searching through the filing cabinet for paperwork related to our home insurance, I found that exact envelope tucked between old tax documents. It wasn't sealed anymore. Across the front, in bold letters, were the words, "Confidential, Human Resources." My first instinct was to put it back without looking. It wasn't addressed to me, and I respected Rachel's privacy. But then I noticed a yellow sticky note attached to the front with Michael's name written on it. Something about it didn't feel right. Inside wasn't a love letter or a photograph like you see in movies. It was much worse because it felt real. The first page described an internal complaint filed by an employee who claimed a senior executive had been giving promotions and special treatment to women he was having inappropriate relationships with. The executive's name had been blacked out, but several details matched Michael perfectly. My stomach dropped as I kept reading. The complaint didn't mention Rachel anywhere, but one sentence refused to leave my mind. Multiple employees may have been involved over several years. I read that line again and again, trying to convince myself it had nothing to do with my wife. I folded every page back into the envelope, placed it exactly where I'd found it, and sat alone in my office for nearly an hour, hoping I was connecting dots that didn't belong together. That evening, Rachel came home smiling like nothing had happened. She talked about work, laughed at something she'd heard in the office, and asked what I wanted for dinner. I looked across the table at the woman I'd loved for over a decade and asked myself one question I never imagined I'd have to ask. Did I trust my wife because she had earned it? Or because I was too afraid to find out the truth? I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I made a decision that would change everything. Before accusing the woman I loved of something unforgivable, I needed proof, and I had no idea that the proof was already on its way to my front door. For the next several days, I acted like nothing had changed. I went to work, came home, asked Rachel about her day, and smiled whenever she smiled. The only difference was that I had stopped listening to her words. Instead, I started paying attention to everything she did. She took her phone everywhere, even when she walked into another room for a few seconds. She never left it charging on the kitchen counter anymore. Late at night, after she thought I was asleep, the screen would light up, and she'd quietly leave the bedroom before replying. None of those things proved she was having an affair, but together they created a feeling I couldn't ignore. I kept telling myself I was looking for evidence that would clear her name, not destroy our marriage. Then, one rainy Thursday afternoon, someone knocked on my front door while I was working from home. A woman I'd never seen before introduced herself as Emily. She looked exhausted, nervous, and like she hadn't slept in days. Before I could ask who she was, she quietly said, "I'm Michael's wife. I think our spouses have been lying to both of us." For a few seconds, I couldn't even respond. Emily apologized for showing up without warning and asked if we could talk somewhere private. We sat in my backyard, and she pulled out a folder that looked almost identical to the HR envelope I'd found weeks earlier. She explained that she discovered messages between Michael and another employee months ago. At first, she thought it was a one-time mistake. Then she found more messages. Different names. Different women. Different years. She hired a private investigator after Michael kept denying everything. The investigator uncovered hotel records, company credit card charges, and travel schedules that didn't match official business trips. Then Emily handed me several printed photographs. I expected to see something obvious, but the first few pictures only showed Rachel and Michael leaving restaurants after work, walking through hotel lobbies, and getting into the same car. They could have been innocent. Then I reached the last photo. It showed the two of them kissing outside a hotel on the exact date of our anniversary. My hands started shaking so badly that I nearly dropped every page onto the ground. Emily wasn't angry anymore. She looked completely defeated. She told me Michael had convinced several women that helping him outside the office would help their careers. Some refused him and quietly disappeared from important projects. Others agreed because they believed it was the only way to move forward. She admitted she still didn't know which women had been manipulated and which had made their own choices. "I'm not here because I hate your wife," she said. "I'm here because I deserve the truth, and so do you." I thanked her for telling me, but I couldn't promise what I'd do next. After she left, I stayed outside for almost an hour staring at those photographs, hoping they would somehow stop being real. They never did. That night, Rachel came home smiling, talking about another successful meeting, completely unaware that everything had already changed. I looked at her across the dinner table and realized I was sitting with someone I no longer recognized. I wanted to confront her immediately, but something stopped me. Emily's words kept repeating in my head. Some women were manipulated, others made their own choices. I still didn't know which one described my wife. So instead of accusing her, I simply asked, "Did you ever feel like Michael expected more from you than your work?" She froze for less than a second before forcing a smile and saying, "Why would you even ask that?" That tiny pause told me more than any excuse ever could. But the truth I would hear the following night would be even worse than the photographs, because Rachel wasn't going to deny the affair. She was going to explain why she believed she had done nothing truly wrong. The next evening, I asked Rachel to sit down with me. I placed the photographs on the table without saying a word. She looked at the first one, then the second, and by the third, she stopped pretending. There were no tears, no panic. She simply leaned back in her chair and whispered, "I guess you know." I asked her the only question that mattered. Was any of it a lie? She shook her head. No. My chest felt hollow. I kept waiting for her to tell me Michael had pressured her, threatened her job, or manipulated her. Instead, she admitted that what started as flirting slowly became an affair. She said Michael made her feel important, listened to her, and convinced her she deserved more than the life she had. When I asked if she had ever thought about me, she quietly said, "Every day." But those words meant nothing anymore, because every day she still chose him. Then I asked the question that had been destroying me for months. "Are you sorry for sleeping with your boss?" Rachel looked down for several seconds before answering. "I'm sorry I missed our anniversary. You didn't deserve that." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "That's not what I asked." She took a deep breath and said something I'll never forget. "I regret hurting you, but I don't regret the affair. At the time, I wanted it." In that moment, I realized there was nothing left to save. She wasn't asking for forgiveness because she didn't believe she had betrayed her own values. She only felt guilty about the pain it caused afterward. A week later, Michael was placed on administrative leave after multiple employees cooperated with the HR investigation. His wife filed for divorce, and several executives resigned as the company tried to contain the scandal. Rachel lost her promotion and eventually resigned before the investigation ended. As for me, I didn't fight to keep the marriage alive. I filed for divorce quietly and walked away without asking for revenge. The courtroom wasn't where I found peace. Peace came the day I stopped waiting for an apology that was never coming. Sometimes people ask me what hurt the most. They expect me to say the affair. It wasn't. The affair lasted a few months. Her honesty lasted one sentence. She apologized for missing our anniversary, but never for betraying our marriage. Even now, I still wonder what hurts more, being lied to by someone you love, or discovering they never believed they owed you the truth in the first place. If you were in my position, could you ever forgive someone who regretted getting caught, but never regretted the choice itself?